You were told that being polite would take you far in life, that if you stayed nice, quiet, and understanding, people would respect you. But pause for a moment and look around. Is that really what happened? You smiled when you were uncomfortable. You said it's okay when it clearly wasn't. You agreed, adjusted, and stayed silent just to avoid conflict. And what did you get in return? More pressure, more expectations, less respect. Here's the hard truth no one says out loud. Politeness didn't make you valuable, it made you convenient. People don't cross your boundaries because they're evil. They cross them because you never made those boundaries clear. Every time you chose peace over honesty, every time you avoided saying no, you trained people how to treat you. And slowly, something dangerous happened. You stopped knowing what you want. Your opinions became softer, your voice became quieter, and your presence became optional. This is not about becoming rude. This is not about being aggressive or arrogant. This is about understanding that respect does not come from being liked, it comes from being clear. The moment you stop being overly polite, the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop apologizing for existing, everything changes. Some people will feel uncomfortable. Some people will leave. And that's exactly how you'll know it's working, because the goal was never to please everyone. The goal was to stop disappearing in your own life. The politeness trap doesn't appear suddenly. It develops slowly, quietly, and so subtly that most people never realize when they've fallen into it. From childhood, you're taught that being polite is the safest way to move through the world. You're told to be respectful, agreeable, accommodating, and easy to deal with. You learn that saying yes keeps things smooth, that staying quiet avoids trouble, and that prioritizing other people's comfort makes you a good person. At first, this seems harmless, even admirable. But over time, politeness stops being a choice and becomes your default response. And that's where the problem begins. When politeness becomes automatic, you stop checking in with yourself. You stop asking whether you actually agree, whether you actually want to help, or whether something feels wrong. Instead, your first instinct becomes avoiding discomfort, especially the discomfort of conflict. You hesitate before expressing disagreement. You soften your words to the point where your message loses its meaning. You smile even when you're frustrated, tired, or disrespected. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, even when it clearly is. Every time you do this, you send a silent message not just to others, but to yourself that your feelings come second. This is how the trap tightens. People don't usually take advantage of you because they are intentionally malicious. Most of the time, they simply respond to the signals you give them. Human beings naturally test boundaries, especially when those boundaries are unclear. When you consistently agree, accommodate, and stay polite regardless of the situation, people learn that you're flexible. Then they learn that you're reliable. And eventually, they learn that you're available at their convenience. Your kindness gets reinterpreted as compliance, and your politeness gets mistaken for permission. One of the most dangerous aspects of this trap is that it disguises itself as maturity. You convince yourself that you're being the bigger person, that you're choosing peace over drama. You take pride in being low maintenance, easygoing, and understanding. But underneath that self-image, something unhealthy is forming. You start carrying more than your share of responsibility. You take on extra work without complaint. You absorb emotional labor that isn't yours. You let things slide repeatedly, hoping that your patience will eventually be noticed or rewarded. Instead, it becomes expected, Over time, a pattern emerges. The more polite you are, the more is asked of you. The more you give, the less it's acknowledged. You may notice that others feel comfortable interrupting you, changing plans at the last minute, or ignoring your needs altogether. You might feel invisible in group settings, overlooked in decision-making, or taken for granted in relationships. And when you finally feel resentment building, you're confused. You wonder why you feel exhausted when you've been doing the right thing all along. The truth is that constant politeness creates imbalance. Relationships, whether professional or personal, depend on mutual respect, and respect requires clarity. When you avoid asserting yourself, you remove that clarity. You don't give people a clear sense of where you stand or what you expect. As a result, they fill in the gaps with their own assumptions, usually in ways that benefit them. This isn't because they're cruel. It's because ambiguity invites overreach. Another layer of the politeness trap is guilt. You feel guilty for wanting more, guilty for saying no, guilty for even thinking that someone else is being unfair. You start over-explaining yourself when you do try to set boundaries, as if you need to justify your right to have them. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. You apologize for taking up space. You apologize for existing with needs. Politeness, in this form, becomes self-erasure. What makes this especially damaging is that the consequences don't show up immediately. They accumulate. Slowly, your confidence erodes. You begin doubting your instincts. You hesitate before speaking, even when you have something valuable to say. You second-guess your reactions, wondering if you're being too sensitive or too demanding. Eventually, you internalize the idea that your role is to adapt, not to lead, to support, not to be supported. At this stage, politeness is no longer about kindness, it's about fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of being rejected, fear of causing tension. You start measuring your worth by how comfortable others feel around you, even if that comfort comes at your expense. And the more you do this, the harder it becomes to break the pattern, because you've trained both yourself and others to expect this version of you. The politeness trap doesn't mean you're weak. It means you were conditioned to believe that harmony matters more than honesty. But without honesty, harmony is fake. It's surface-level calm, hiding internal resentment. And eventually, that resentment either turns inward, damaging your self-esteem, or erupts outward in ways that surprise everyone, including you. Understanding this trap is the first step out of it. Not to become rude, aggressive, or careless, but to recognize that politeness, without boundaries, is self-betrayal. If you don't define your limits, someone else will, and they won't do it with your best interests in mind. This is where the real work begins. Not by changing how others behave, but by understanding why they behave the way they do around you. To move forward, you have to face an uncomfortable psychological truth. Most people don't respond to intentions, they respond to patterns. They don't analyze your kindness. They analyze what they can get away with. And politeness, when it lacks firmness, creates a very specific pattern, one that signals low resistance. Human beings are constantly scanning their environment for cues. These cues help them decide how to speak, how much to demand, how far to push, and when to stop. This happens subconsciously. No one sits down and says, "This person is polite, so I'll disrespect them." Instead, they notice that you don't push back. They notice that you hesitate. They notice that when they inconvenience you, nothing bad happens. Over time, their behavior adjusts accordingly. What began as politeness becomes predictability, and predictability invites exploitation. This is why politeness is so often misread as weakness. Not because being polite is inherently weak, but because weakness is defined by a lack of consequence. When someone crosses a line and nothing changes, no objection, no correction, no withdrawal of access, the brain registers safety. Safety to repeat the behavior, safety to escalate it. In psychological terms, this is reinforcement. Your silence rewards the behavior, even if that was never your intention. Assertive people, on the other hand, create friction. Not drama friction, a moment of pause, a recalibration. When they are interrupted, they reclaim the floor. When a request crosses a line, they decline without excessive explanation. This friction sends a powerful signal. There is a cost to ignoring my boundaries. People may not like that cost, but they respect it. Polite people remove that cost entirely, and without cost, there is no restraint. Another reason politeness is mistaken for weakness lies in emotional labor. Polite individuals often manage not just their own emotions, but everyone else's as well. They anticipate discomfort and rush to smooth it over. They soften truths. They sugarcoat feedback. They absorb tension so others don't have to. While this may feel generous, it creates an imbalance. When one person consistently carries the emotional weight, others grow dependent on it. They stop self-regulating because you're doing it for them. Psychologically, this shifts the power dynamic. Power doesn't always come from authority or aggression. It often comes from who is willing to tolerate discomfort. When you refuse to let things be awkward, when you rush to restore comfort, you give up leverage. The person who can sit calmly in discomfort controls the interaction. Polite people usually can't. They rush to fix, apologize, or explain. And in doing so, they place themselves in a lower position without realizing it. There's also the issue of credibility. People trust clarity more than kindness. When your words are wrapped in too much politeness, they lose force. If it's not too much trouble, sounds optional. I don't know, maybe sounds uncertain. It's okay, don't worry about it, sounds like permission. Over time, your language trains others not to take you seriously. Even when you finally mean something strongly, it comes out diluted, and people respond accordingly. This dynamic becomes especially visible in professional environments. The polite employee is often praised for being dependable, flexible, and easy to work with. But when promotions, leadership roles, or influence are on the table, that same employee is overlooked. Why? Because leadership is associated with decisiveness and authority. Politeness without assertiveness doesn't signal either. It signals support, not direction. Reliability, not influence. And while organizations need supportive people, they rarely reward them with power. In personal relationships, the cost is even higher. Friends may constantly lean on you without reciprocating. Partners may prioritize their needs while minimizing yours. Family members may dismiss your feelings, assuming you'll understand, as always. When you finally express dissatisfaction, they're shocked not because you're wrong, but because you've disrupted the version of you they've grown comfortable with. And that shock often gets turned back on you, framed as overreaction or sudden change. This is where self-doubt creeps in. You start questioning whether your feelings are valid. You wonder if you're being unreasonable. You fear that asserting yourself will make you the bad one. This fear keeps you stuck. Politeness becomes a defense mechanism, not against hurting others, but against being abandoned. And that fear is deeply rooted. It comes from early conditioning that taught you love and approval were conditional on being agreeable. From a psychological standpoint, this creates what's known as a compliance identity. You begin to associate safety with agreement, approval with silence, belonging with self-sacrifice. Over time, this identity becomes self-reinforcing. The more you comply, the more people expect compliance. The more they expect it, the harder it feels to break the pattern. Eventually, even small acts of assertiveness feel like betrayal of others and of who you think you are. But here's the critical shift. Respect is not granted based on how kind you are. It's granted based on how clearly you value yourself. People may appreciate politeness, but they organize their behavior around boundaries. Without boundaries, there is nothing to organize around. Everything becomes fluid, negotiable, and ultimately, understanding this psychology is uncomfortable because it forces you to let go of a comforting illusion that if you're good enough, patient enough, and polite enough, people will eventually do the right thing. In reality, people do what the situation allows. And politeness, without firmness, allows too much. This doesn't mean people are bad. It means they're human. Humans respond to incentives, patterns, and feedback. When the feedback is silence, accommodation, and forgiveness without limits, the behavior continues. When the feedback changes, when boundaries appear, behavior adjusts. Sometimes immediately, sometimes slowly, sometimes with resistance, but it adjusts. This is why the work ahead is internal before it's external. You can't simply act confident or set boundaries overnight if your nervous system associates those actions with danger. You have to unlearn the idea that politeness is your only currency. You have to accept that being respected may mean being misunderstood, that being clear may temporarily cost you approval, that being assertive may trigger discomfort in you and in others. And that's the turning point. Because once you understand why politeness has been working against you, you can stop blaming yourself for the outcomes it produced. You can see the pattern clearly. You can recognize that nothing was wrong with you, you were just playing by rules that reward self. The next step isn't to abandon politeness entirely, but to stop leading with it, to place clarity before comfort, to let respect grow from consistency, not compliance. That shift is where identity begins to return, slowly, deliberately, and with far more strength than politeness alone ever provided. But before that identity can fully form, something else has to be confronted, the damage already done. Because excessive politeness doesn't just affect how others treat you. It quietly reshapes how you see yourself, how you make decisions, and how much space you believe you're allowed to occupy in your own life. When politeness dominates your behavior for too long, your sense of self starts to blur. Not because you lack opinions or desires, but because you've trained yourself to suppress them. Every time you choose harmony over honesty, you push your authentic response a little further into the background. Over time, those responses stop coming automatically. You pause before answering simple questions. You say, "I don't mind" when you do. You say whatever works when it doesn't. Eventually, you're no longer sure what you actually want, you only know what won't upset anyone. This is how identity erosion begins. Identity is built through choices, and choices require preference. But politeness discourages preference. It frames strong opinions as selfish and personal needs as inconvenient. So you adapt. You become flexible. And while flexibility sounds like a strength, constant flexibility without anchoring becomes shapelessness. You start existing in reaction to others rather than from your own center. One of the clearest signs of this erosion is emotional numbness. Not dramatic sadness, but a low-level disconnection. You function. You perform. You do what's expected. But there's a sense of distance between you and your own experiences. Moments that should feel rewarding feel muted. Frustration has nowhere to go, so it turns inward. You may not even label it as frustration anymore, it just feels like tiredness, or emptiness, or being off without knowing why. This internal disconnection is reinforced by external feedback. People describe you as easygoing, chill, or nice. On the surface, these sound like compliments, but they also signal that you're not being perceived as someone with depth, complexity, or conviction. No one says they're easygoing about a person who challenges the room. They say it about someone who blends into it. And when that becomes your primary identity in the eyes of others, it starts shaping how you behave to maintain it. At this stage, politeness is no longer just behavior, it's survival. You fear that if you change, you'll lose connection. That if you assert yourself, people will leave. So you keep performing the role that's been rewarded, even when it costs you internally. This is why many overly polite people feel intense anxiety around confrontation, even minor ones. Their nervous system has learned to associate self-expression with risk. This anxiety doesn't come from nowhere. Often, it's rooted in early experiences where being agreeable meant being safe. Maybe conflict led to rejection, punishment, or emotional withdrawal. Maybe being good was the way you earned approval. Over time, your brain linked politeness with belonging. And once something is tied to belonging, it becomes very hard to let go even when it's harming you. As a result, your internal dialogue changes. You begin questioning yourself constantly. Am I overreacting? Maybe I'm expecting too much. I should just let it go. These thoughts sound reasonable, even mature, but when they show up every time you're uncomfortable, they become a form of self-gaslighting. You invalidate your own experience before anyone else gets the chance to. This self-doubt makes it difficult to trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, you hesitate. When someone crosses a line, you rationalize it. When you're hurt, you minimize it. Over time, this creates a dangerous split between what you feel and what you allow yourself to acknowledge. And that split is exhausting. Living against your internal signals requires constant effort, constant monitoring, constant suppression. Eventually, the pressure builds. For some people, it manifests as burnout. For others, as sudden emotional outbursts that seem out of character. They finally say something, but it comes out sharp, resentful, or overwhelming. This often shocks the people around them, who have only ever known the polite version. The reaction is predictable. This isn't like you. But in reality, it's the most honest version they've seen in years. This moment can be deeply confusing. You may feel guilty for expressing yourself, even though the expression was long overdue. You may apologize for being honest. You may retreat back into politeness to restore the familiar balance. And the cycle continues. Identity loss through politeness is particularly damaging because it's invisible. There's no clear event to point to, no single betrayal or failure, just a gradual fading. You wake up one day and realize you've been living according to other people's expectations, schedules, and comfort levels. Your life works, but it doesn't feel like it belongs to you. What makes this even harder is that politeness is socially rewarded. People don't tell you to stop. They benefit from it. So there's no external pressure to change, only internal discomfort. And because that discomfort is quiet and chronic, it's easy to ignore. You tell yourself this is just how adulthood feels, that everyone's tired, that this is normal. But it's not normal to feel disconnected from your own voice. Rebuilding identity doesn't happen through grand gestures. It starts with small, uncomfortable moments of honesty, saying what you actually think instead of what sounds acceptable, admitting when you're tired, declining without explaining, letting silence exist without rushing to fill it. These moments feel risky because they challenge the identity you've been performing, but they're also the moments where something solid begins to form. As you start doing this, you may feel a sense of unfamiliarity with yourself. You might think, who am I becoming? That uncertainty is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're no longer operating on autopilot. You're making conscious choices, and consciousness is the foundation of identity. Not everyone will respond well to this change. Some people will push back. Some will accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of being different. They're not wrong. You are different. You're no longer prioritizing being liked over being real. And that shift naturally disrupts relationships that were built on imbalance. This is where many people are tempted to stop. The discomfort feels too high. The reactions feel too personal. But this phase is temporary. What comes after it is clarity. You begin to recognize which relationships can adapt to a healthier dynamic and which ones depended on your silence. You stop chasing approval from people who only valued you when you were convenient. Slowly, your sense of self strengthens. You feel more grounded in your decisions, less reactive, less apologetic. You don't need to announce this change, it shows. Your posture changes. Your tone changes. Your presence changes. You take up space without forcing it. And this is the critical realization. Identity isn't found by becoming louder or more aggressive. It's found by becoming more aligned. When your actions match your internal truth, you feel whole. Politeness no longer runs the show, choice does. This is not the end of the process. It's the midpoint. Because once identity begins to return, the next challenge is learning how to express it in the world clearly, calmly, and without guilt. That's where the real transformation takes place. Not in becoming louder, harsher, or more aggressive, but in learning how to express yourself without betraying yourself. This is the point where most people get confused, because they assume the opposite of being polite is being rude. It isn't. The opposite of being overly polite is being clear. And clarity is a skill that has to be learned, practiced, and reinforced, especially if you've spent most of your life avoiding it. At first, clarity feels unnatural. When you're used to cushioning every sentence, removing that padding feels exposed. You might notice an urge to over-explain yourself, to justify your decisions, or to soften your words until they lose their edge. This urge doesn't come from logic, it comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being disliked. Fear of being seen as difficult. But clarity requires you to tolerate those fears without letting them dictate your behavior. One of the most important distinctions to make at this stage is between intention and impact. You may intend to be kind, but if the impact of your politeness is resentment, exhaustion, or self-erasure, then something has to change. Assertiveness doesn't mean abandoning kindness. It means directing kindness inward as well. It means acknowledging that your needs carry the same weight as anyone else's, even when honoring them creates tension. clear communication begins with ownership. Instead of framing your words around other people's reactions, you frame them around your own position. You say, "I can't do that," instead of, "I wish I could help, but maybe." You say, "That doesn't work for me," instead of, "I'm sorry, is it okay if?" These statements may feel blunt at first, but they're not aggressive, they're honest. They don't attack. They don't accuse. They simply state reality. What makes this difficult is the internal resistance that follows. When you assert yourself, you may feel guilt almost immediately. You may replay the conversation in your head, worrying that you sounded cold or unkind. This is conditioning surfacing. Your nervous system is adjusting to a new pattern, and it interprets unfamiliar behavior as danger. The key is not to eliminate this discomfort, but to move through it without retreating. Another challenge at this stage is inconsistency from others. People who benefited from your politeness may test you. They might push harder, ignore your boundaries, or act confused. This isn't proof that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that the dynamic is changing. When patterns shift, resistance is normal. If you give in during this phase, you reinforce the old pattern. If you stay consistent, a new equilibrium begins to form. Consistency is what turns assertiveness into respect. Not one big confrontation, but many small moments where you hold your line. You don't argue. You don't over-justify. You repeat your position calmly. This calm repetition is powerful because it removes drama from the interaction. It shows that your boundary isn't emotional, it's structural, and people adapt to structure, even when they don't like it. It's also important to recognize that clarity doesn't require full transparency. You don't owe everyone access to your internal process. You don't need to explain why you're tired, why you're unavailable, or why you've changed your mind. Oversharing is often a leftover habit from politeness, way to soften the boundary by making it negotiable. But boundaries work best when they're simple and firm. As you practice this, you may notice a shift in how conversations feel. You speak less, but with more intention. You listen more closely, but you don't absorb responsibility that isn't yours. Silence becomes less threatening. You no longer rush to fill it with reassurance. This creates a subtle but profound change in your presence. People begin to sense that you're not easily swayed, and that awareness alters how they approach you. There will be moments when assertiveness feels lonely, when you don't get the immediate approval you're used to, when you feel misunderstood. This is part of the transition. Politeness often kept you surrounded by people, but not necessarily supported by them. Clarity filters your relationships. It reveals who respects you and who merely tolerated you as long as you were convenient. This filtering can be painful, but it's also liberating. You stop investing energy in managing other people's expectations. You stop carrying conversations alone. You stop negotiating your own worth. In place of that effort, you gain space, mental, emotional, and physical. Space to think. Space to choose. Space to rest. One of the most powerful outcomes of this shift is how it changes your relationship with conflict. Conflict stops being something to avoid at all costs and becomes something to navigate. You learn that disagreement doesn't equal rejection, that tension doesn't equal danger, and that standing your ground doesn't mean you're unkind. It means you're anchored. This anchoring strengthens your sense of self. You trust yourself more because you act in alignment with your values. You no longer feel the constant friction of suppressing your truth. Decisions become clearer. Regret decreases, even when outcomes aren't perfect. You feel at peace with how you handled yourself. Importantly, assertiveness also improves your ability to be genuinely kind. When you're no longer polite out of fear, your kindness becomes a choice. It becomes intentional, not compulsory. You help because you want to, not because you're afraid not to. And that kind of kindness is sustainable. It doesn't breed resentment. It doesn't drain you. It strengthens connections instead of weakening them. At this stage, you may notice something subtle but profound. People begin to respond differently to you. They ask instead of assume. They listen more carefully. They respect your time. Not everyone, but enough to make the difference undeniable. This isn't because you've changed who you are. It's because you've stopped hiding who you are. And this leads to the final shift, the one that defines the outcome of the entire process. When you consistently choose clarity over comfort, you stop seeking validation from the outside. You no longer need everyone to agree with you. You don't need to be liked by everyone in the room. You know where you stand, and that knowledge creates a quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. That confidence is not loud. It's steady. It's the kind that holds its ground without force. And once it's there, something irreversible happens. You stop negotiating yourself, not because you've become rigid or closed off, but because you've finally internalized a simple truth: you are no longer available at the cost of yourself. This is the point where the external world begins to respond differently, not through force or fear, but through recalibration. People adjust when they realize access to you is no longer unconditional. Respect does not arrive dramatically. It shows up quietly in changed behavior. People ask before assuming. They listen instead of interrupting. They think twice before crossing lines they once ignored. This isn't because you demanded respect. It's because your actions now make disrespect inconvenient. When your boundaries are consistent, people learn that ignoring them leads nowhere. Over time, this consistency becomes your reputation. What's important to understand here is that respect is not universal. Some people will never adjust. They benefited too much from the old dynamic. When they realize they can no longer extract the same emotional labor, time, or compliance, they may withdraw or become critical. This can feel like loss, but it's actually clarification. You're no longer confusing tolerance with connection. This stage often brings a surprising sense of calm. The mental noise that once accompanied every interaction begins to fade. You no longer replay conversations, wondering if you said the wrong thing or should have done more. Your decisions feel cleaner. Even when situations are imperfect, you know you acted in alignment with yourself. That alignment becomes a stabilizing force. Another shift occurs in how you value your time and energy. You become more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. You recognize that every yes carries a cost, and you choose carefully where you pay it. This selectivity creates space for rest, creativity, focus, and deeper relationships. You stop filling your life with obligations that leave you depleted. Interestingly, as you become more grounded, you also become more trustworthy. People know where you stand. They don't have to guess or test. Your words match your actions. This predictability is different from the earlier kind. It's not predictability through compliance, but predictability through integrity. And integrity commands respect in a way politeness never could. Your relationships begin to change in quality, not just quantity. Conversations feel more honest. Conflicts, when they arise, are clearer and shorter. You're no longer carrying unspoken resentment. so there's less emotional undercurrent. You address issues when they're small instead of letting them grow into silent burdens. This creates healthier dynamics. Even when they're not always comfortable, there's also a shift in how you perceive approval. You no longer chase it. Compliments are appreciated, but they don't define you. Criticism is considered, but it doesn't dismantle you. Your sense of worth has an internal anchor now. This makes you less reactive and more deliberate. You choose responses instead of defaulting to habits. One of the most profound changes at this stage is how you experience freedom. Freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's the absence of self-betrayal. You still care. You still show up, but you do so on your terms. This creates a sense of agency that was missing before, a feeling that your life is something you're participating in, not managing for others. You may notice that new opportunities appear, not because you're seeking them, but because your presence has changed. People who value clarity and mutual respect are drawn to you. They recognize the stability you bring. Leadership roles, deeper collaborations, and more balanced relationships become possible because you're no longer operating from fear. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. Boundaries require maintenance. There will still be moments of doubt, especially in situations that trigger old patterns. But now, those moments are met with awareness instead of panic. You notice the urge to appease, and you pause. That pause is power. It gives you the ability to choose differently. Looking back, you may realize that politeness once felt like safety, but it was a fragile kind. It depended on others' reactions. Self-respect, on the other hand, creates durable safety. It doesn't require constant adjustment. It doesn't disappear when someone is displeased. It stays with you. The irony is that when you stop trying so hard to be liked, you become easier to respect. When you stop smoothing every edge, your presence gains definition. People know how to engage with you because you're no longer ambiguous. And even those who don't like the change cannot ignore it. At this point, politeness becomes what it was always meant to be: a tool, not an identity. You use it when it aligns with your values, not when it costs you your voice. You're still capable of kindness, empathy, and understanding, but they come from strength, not fear. The journey from politeness to self-respect isn't about rejecting who you were. It's about integrating what was missing: the patience you had, the empathy you showed, the awareness you developed. They don't disappear. They're now supported by clarity and boundaries. That combination is what creates maturity. This is why the transformation is irreversible. Once you've experienced life without constant self-suppression, it's impossible to return willingly. You recognize the old patterns too quickly. You feel the internal resistance immediately, and instead of ignoring it, you listen. In the end, stopping being overly polite doesn't make you harder. It makes you whole. You no longer shrink to fit spaces that were never meant for you. You no longer apologize for taking up space. You move through the world with a quiet certainty, aware of your limits, clear in your values, and grounded in your self-respect. That is the real outcome. Not dominance, not control, but a life where your presence is honest, your boundaries are intact, and your respect for yourself and from others is no longer negotiable.